The Great Chamber of the Galactic Assembly was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life. It floated in the space between three stable stars, and its crystal walls held representatives from over 4,000 species. Some breathed oxygen, some breathed methane, some did not breathe at all. But all of them had come together, cycle after cycle, to maintain peace in a galaxy that had known too much war. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez stood at the central podium, her voice carried by translation devices to every corner of the vast room. She was a small woman by human standards, with dark hair turning gray at the temples and laugh lines around her eyes. She spoke about trade agreements and cultural exchanges, about shared research programs and disaster relief funds. Her tone was warm and patient. Even when delegates interrupted with difficult questions, the Vethkai delegation watched her with their compound eyes. They were an ancient species, insectoid in form, and they had seen civilizations rise and fall for longer than most species had existed. Elder Kriegstall leaned toward his assistant and made a soft clicking sound that their language used for private speech. "Watch how she moves," Kriegstall said. "Watch how she holds herself when the Dominion ambassador challenges her." The assistant, young by Vethkai standards and only 300 years old, observed carefully. Ambassador Vasquez was responding to a trade complaint with grace and humor. She made a small joke, and several delegations laughed. The tension in the room eased. "She seems calm," the assistant said. "Controlled, like the Mallory diplomats." "No," Kriegstall clicked sharply. "The Mallory are calm because they feel no strong emotions. This one is calm despite her emotions. There is a difference, a very important difference." The Vethkai had been studying humanity for 300 years, ever since the strange soft beings had stumbled into the galactic community with their primitive ships and their endless curiosity. In that time, humans had proven themselves to be excellent partners. They shared technology freely. They sent aid to planets in crisis, even planets that had once refused them membership. They apologized for misunderstandings that were not their fault. They seemed almost desperate to be liked. Most assembly species found humans to be pleasant but unremarkable. They were not the strongest, or the fastest, or the longest lived. Their technology was clever, but not revolutionary. Their art was interesting, but not transcendent. They were, in the opinion of most galactic citizens, simply nice. The Vethkai knew better. Their archivists had done what few other species bothered to do. They had studied human history. They had translated human literature and watched human entertainment. They had analyzed human biology and psychology. And what they had found disturbed them deeply. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself. Not once, but many times. They had built weapons capable of ending all life on their world. And then they had pointed those weapons at each other for decades. They had fought wars of such brutality that their own historians struggled to describe them. They had committed acts of cruelty against their own kind that made even the battle-hardened Crocians seem restrained by comparison. And then, somehow, they had stopped. They had looked at what they were capable of, and they had chosen to be different. They had built systems and societies designed to contain their own worst impulses. They had created art and philosophy centered on the struggle to be good. They had, in effect, put a leash on themselves. Kriegstall called it the courtesy setting. It was his theory that the humans the galaxy saw were not humanity's true face. The kindness, the patience, the endless willingness to compromise, these were choices. Deliberate, constant, and exhausting. Most assembly members dismissed Kriegstall's theories as paranoid fantasy. Humans were simply gentle creatures who had gotten lucky in their evolution. The violence in their past was exaggerated by their dramatic historians. The weapons they had built were defensive measures against a dangerous home planet. But Kriegstall had read human fiction. He had seen what they imagined when they let their minds wander. Heroes who killed without mercy. Soldiers who fought against impossible odds with nothing but rage and determination. Apocalyptic scenarios where humanity survived through sheer stubborn refusal to die. No truly gentle species dreams such dreams. The assembly session continued. Ambassador Vasquez finished her report on the agricultural exchange program and yielded the podium to the next speaker. She walked back to her delegation section with the same easy grace she always showed, stopping to exchange pleasantries with several other ambassadors along the way. She complimented the Kalo ambassador on her new ceremonial robes. She asked the Thrall delegate about his family. She laughed at something the Mallory representative said. Even though everyone knew the Mallory had no sense of humor, watching her, it was impossible to believe she was anything but what she appeared to be, a kind, competent diplomat doing her best to maintain peace in a complicated galaxy. Krickstall turned to his assistant. "Do you know why I fear the humans more than I fear the Crocian?" The assistant considered the question. The Crocian Dominion was a military empire that had conquered 12 species before the Assembly formed to stop them. They were brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Their return from the Galactic Rim had been the subject of worried discussions for months. "The Crocian are predictable," the assistant guessed. "The humans are not?" "Close," Krickstall said. "The Crocian are what they are. They conquer because conquest is their nature. They cannot help themselves." He watched Ambassador Vasquez take her seat, still smiling, still radiating warmth. "The humans are what they choose to be. Every moment of every day they choose. And that means they can choose differently." The assistant felt a chill despite the carefully controlled temperature of the chamber. "You think they will?" "I think something will eventually make them." Krickstall's compound eyes tracked across the chamber to where the Crocian delegation sat in hostile silence. "And I think, when that happens, the galaxy will learn why humans are so very committed to being kind. It is not because kindness comes easily to them." He paused, watching Ambassador Vasquez laugh at another joke, her whole face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "It is because they know exactly what they are capable of when they stop." The session moved on to other business. Trade disputes and boundary negotiations, and the endless small conflicts that kept the assembly busy. Ambassador Vasquez participated with her usual skill, building bridges, smoothing tensions, finding compromises that left everyone slightly satisfied. No one watching would have guessed that anything was wrong. No one except the Vethkai, who watched and waited and hoped that their theories would never be tested. They would not have to wait long. The warning came 3 days later, in the middle of a routine session about mining rights in the outer territories. Every screen in the assembly chamber flickered and died. The lights dimmed, and then a new image appeared, broadcast on every surface capable of displaying it. A Crocian warship filled the view. It was massive, bristling with weapons, painted in the dark red colors of the Dominion's conquering fleet. But it was not the ship that made the assembly fall silent. It was what floated beside it. The human colony ship. Meridian Hope hung in space like a wounded bird. It was a civilian vessel, designed for long-distance travel, with no weapons and minimal shields. Its hull was scorched from warning shots. Its engines were dark. A Crocian face appeared on screen. War Master Thrax was old for his species, his scales scarred from 100 battles. One eye replaced with a mechanical implant that glowed red in the dim light of his command center. He smiled, showing rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Greetings to the Galactic Assembly," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I am War Master Thrax of the Crocian Dominion. I come with a simple message." He gestured, and the view shifted to show the interior of the Meridian Hope. Humans were crowded into the central compartments, their faces pale with fear. Children clung to their parents. Medical staff moved through the crowds, trying to keep people calm. 40,000 humans, Thrax continued, including 12,000 of their young. All of them guests of the Dominion until Earth meets our demands. The assembly chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted protests. The KLO ambassador was already calling for an emergency session. The Malori were calculating response options on their personal devices. Only the Vethkai remained silent, their compound eyes fixed on the human delegation. Ambassador Vasquez had not moved. She sat in her chair, hands folded in her lap, watching the screen with an expression that revealed nothing. Her staff whispered urgently around her, but she did not respond. Thrax waited for the noise to die down. He seemed to enjoy it. "Our demands are simple," he said. "Earth will cede control of the Perseus Arm to the Dominion. All human colonies in that region will be evacuated. All military assets will be surrendered. And Earth will pay tribute to the Dominion for the next 1,000 years." He leaned forward, his scarred face filling the screen. "You have one standard rotation to agree. After that, we will begin executing hostages. We will start with the children." The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Vasquez stood slowly. Her movements were careful, controlled, like someone walking on ice. She walked to the central podium with the same easy grace she always showed, but something was different. Her smile was gone. Her eyes were focused on something far away. "War Master Thrax," she said. Her voice was steady. "May I have a moment to consult with my government?" Thrax laughed. It was an ugly sound, full of contempt. "Of course, Ambassador. You may have 10 of your minutes. Use them to say goodbye to your people." He cut the transmission, and the screens returned to their normal display. The assembly chamber remained frozen, delegates staring at each other in shock and horror. Ambassador Vasquez stepped away from the podium. She touched a device on her wrist and spoke quietly into it. "This is Vasquez. Authentication code Prometheus 77 Delta. Confirm visual on the Meridian Hope." A pause. Then a voice responded, tinny through the small speaker. "Confirmed, Ambassador. We have eyes on the target. Hostile count? 340 warships. Standard Crochan formation. The flagship is the Crushing Tide." Vasquez nodded slowly. The Vethkai assistant noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. Not with fear, he realized. With something else entirely. "Connect me to Fleet Command," she said. "Authorization, Omega." There was a longer pause this time. When the voice returned, it was different, deeper, harder. "Ambassador Vasquez. This is Admiral Chun of the Unkindness. We are standing by. Admiral, the Crochan have 40,000 of our people. 12,000 children." "Yes, ma'am. We've been watching." Vasquez closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the Vethkai assistant felt a chill run through his body. Something had changed in her face. The warmth was still there, buried deep, but something else had risen to the surface. Something old and cold and patient. "Execute option Omega," she said. "No quarter." "An admiral?" "Yes, ma'am." "Make sure they see it coming. Make sure they know why." "Understood." Unkindness out. Vasquez lowered her wrist. She stood still for a moment, breathing slowly, like someone preparing for a difficult task. Then she turned and walked back to the podium. The assembly watched her in silence. The Crochan transmission had resumed, showing Thrax lounging in his command chair, confident in his power. "War Master Thrax," Vasquez said. Her voice was different now. Lower. Quieter. The translation devices had to boost the volume so everyone could hear. "Ah, Ambassador." Thrax smiled his predator's smile. "Have you convinced your government to see reason?" "I have consulted with Earth Command," Vasquez said. "We have reviewed your demands carefully, and we decline." The word hung in the air like smoke. Thrax's smile faltered. "You decline?" "Yes." Vasquez tilted her head slightly, and the Vethkai assistant saw her smile for the first time since the transmission began. It was not the warm, diplomatic smile he had seen before. It was something older. Something with too many teeth. "You seem confused, War Master. Let me explain something about humanity that you appear to have misunderstood." She stepped forward, and her shadow seemed to grow on the walls of the chamber. "For 300 years, we have been very, very careful. We smile. We negotiate. We compromise. We send aid to our enemies and apologize for things that are not our fault. Do you know why?" Thrax said nothing. His hand had moved toward a weapon at his side. "Because we remember what we are when we stop." Behind Thrax, alarms began to sound. Officers scrambled across his command deck, shouting in Croatian. The War Master's head snapped around, his one organic eye wide with sudden fear. "What is happening?" he demanded. Vasquez's smile widened. "Your lesson is beginning." The assembly watched in stunned silence as the view behind War Master Thrax changed. New shapes were appearing in the darkness of space, emerging from faster-than-light jumps with a precision that made the Croatian formation look sloppy. Human ships, but they were not like any human ships the galaxy had seen before. The diplomatic vessels that visited assembly space were elegant things, all smooth lines and gleaming white hulls. They looked friendly, approachable, safe. These ships were none of those things. They were angular and black, covered in weapons that the assembly sensors could not identify. They moved through space like predators through water, fast and silent and hungry. Their hulls bore no markings, except for single words painted in burning red. Letters: unkindness, reckoning, consequence, reminder, debt. The largest ship was twice the size of anything the Croatian had brought. Its designation appeared on assembly screens as the automatic identification systems tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Use unkindness. Corvid-class siege carrier. Commission 2487. Crew complement. Classified. Weapons systems. Classified. Combat record. Classified. Its motto scrolled across the bottom of the screen in every language. The translation systems knew. We remembered that Ambassador Vasquez had not moved from the podium. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching the human fleet arrange itself around the Croatian formation like wolves surrounding wounded prey. 300 years ago, she said, and her voice carried through the silent chamber like a knife through silk. Humanity nearly destroyed itself. We had reached a point in our development where our weapons were stronger than our wisdom. We built bombs that could crack the crust of our planet. We engineered diseases that could spread through populations like fire through dry grass. We developed strategies for war that were so cruel, so efficient, so utterly without mercy, that we classified them at the highest levels and swore to never use them again. On screen, the Croatian fleet was scrambling into defensive formation. Thrax was shouting orders, his earlier confidence completely gone. His ships were fast and well-armed, veterans of countless conquests. But they were moving like prey now, not predators. We looked at ourselves, Vasquez continued, and we were afraid. Not of our enemies, not of the universe. We were afraid of what we might become if we did not change. So we put ourselves on a leash. We built our entire civilization around the idea of restraint. Every human you have ever met has been trying, every moment of every day, to be better than our nature demands. The unkindness had come to a stop directly in front of the Croatian flagship. It was close enough that the Croshan gunners could see individual weapon ports opening along its hull. They counted over 300 on the forward section alone. "We are not gentle because it is easy," Vasquez said. "We are gentle because we know what happens when we stop." She turned to face the assembly directly. The delegates sat frozen in their seats, unable to look away from the small human woman who had suddenly become the most terrifying thing in the room. 300 years of peace. 300 years of patience. 300 years of smiling and negotiating and turning the other cheek. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And now you have taken our children." On the screen, a communication channel opened between the Unkindness and the Croshan flagship. Admiral Chun's face appeared, calm and professional, like a doctor preparing for surgery. "War Master Thrax, this is Admiral Chun of the Earth Defense Force vessel Unkindness. You are holding 40,000 human civilians, including 12,000 children. You have threatened to execute them if your demands are not met." Thrax's voice was strained. You cannot be here. Our intelligence said your military was days away. Your intelligence was wrong." Chun's expression did not change. "You have 60 seconds to release all hostages unharmed and surrender your fleet. This is your only warning. We do not give second chances. You are outnumbered." Thrax snarled, his fear turning to anger. "I have 340 ships." "You have 340 targets," Chun corrected. 55 seconds. The assembly watched the countdown on their screens. The Vethkai delegation was the only group not showing signs of panic. Elder Krixtal sat perfectly still, his compound eyes reflecting the light of the human ships. "I told you," he said quietly to his assistant. "I told you what they were." The assistant could not respond. He was watching Ambassador Vasquez, who stood at the podium like a statue carved from ice. Her hands were clasped behind her back now, and her eyes had not left the screen. 30 seconds, Admiral Chun announced. Thrax made his decision. "All ships, open fire. Destroy the human fleet." The Croshan fleet unleashed everything it had. Plasma cannons, missile batteries, energy weapons that burned through the void like artificial stars. The amount of firepower directed at the human ships would have been enough to glass a small moon. The Unkindness did not move. Its shields absorbed the attack without visible effect. Damage reports scrolled across the assembly screens. 0%. The other human ships showed similar results. They hung in space like patient executioners, waiting for the storm to pass. "Time's up," Admiral Chun said. The human ships opened fire. It was not a battle. It was not even a slaughter. The assembly's military analysts would later struggle to find words for what they witnessed. The human weapons did not simply destroy Croshan ships. They took them apart, piece by piece, with surgical precision. Shield generators exploded. Engine cores went dark. Weapon systems melted into slag. And through it all, the Meridian Hope remained untouched. Human ships formed a protective barrier around the colony vessel, intercepting any fire that came close, while the rest of the fleet systematically dismantled the Croshan formation. Ambassador Vasquez watched without expression. Her staff stood behind her, equally silent, equally still. None of them looked surprised. They had known. The assembly realized. They had always known what their species was capable of. They had just hoped they would never have to show it. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, 339 Croshan warships drifted dead in space. The Crushing Tide, Thrax's flagship, was the only vessel left with life support still functioning. Admiral Chun's face appeared on screen again. "War Master Thrax, your fleet has been neutralized. Human Marines are boarding your ship to retrieve our civilians. Do not resist." The view shifted to show armored figures moving through the corridors of the Croshan flagship. They moved in perfect synchronization, clearing rooms with terrifying efficiency. No wasted motion. No hesitation. No mercy. The Croatian crew tried to fight. They died. The Croatian crew tried to surrender. They were restrained and ignored. The Marines moved through the ship like a force of nature, unstoppable and inevitable, until they reached the compartments where the human civilians were being held. The view showed a Marine removing her helmet. She was a young woman, no older than 30, with short dark hair and kind eyes. She knelt beside a crying child and spoke softly. "It's okay. We're here. You're safe now." The contrast was almost unbearable. The same species that had just destroyed a fleet without breaking stride was now cradling frightened children and whispering comfort. Ambassador Vasquez finally moved. She reached up and touched her ear, listening to a communication only she could hear. "All 40,000 civilians recovered," she announced. "No casualties. They're going home." She turned back to the assembly, and for a moment, just a moment, the cold mask slipped. The delegates saw exhaustion and relief and something that might have been shame. Then the mask was back. And Ambassador Vasquez was once again the warm, patient diplomat they had always known. "My apologies for the interruption," she said. "I believe we were discussing mining rights in the outer territories." The galaxy did not return to normal. In the days that followed the battle, every species with access to sensor data analyzed what they had seen. Military commanders studied the recordings frame by frame. Scientists examined the energy signatures of human weapons. Intelligence agencies searched their archives for any hint of the fleet that had appeared from nowhere and destroyed 340 warships. In less than 20 minutes, they found almost nothing. The human military had always been considered modest by galactic standards. They maintained defense forces around their colonies, participated in joint peacekeeping operations, and contributed ships to assembly emergency response fleets. Their vessels were well designed but unremarkable. Their weapons effective but not exceptional. The fleet that had destroyed the Croatian formation was none of those things. The Vethkai were the first to understand. Their archivists had been studying human history for centuries, and they recognized what they were seeing. "They have two militaries," Elder Krikstal explained to the emergency assembly session called 3 days after the battle. "The one they show us is real. It is staffed by real soldiers, equipped with real weapons, used for real missions. But it is not their true strength." He displayed a series of documents on the central screen. Human military budgets from the past 300 years. The numbers were modest, consistent with what the assembly knew. "These are the public records," Krikstal said. "But our analysts have identified discrepancies. Funding that disappears into classified programs. Personnel who vanish from public records. Research facilities that do not officially exist." He changed the display to show an image of the unkindness captured during the battle. "This ship is not in any human database we can access. Its crew does not appear in any personnel records. Its weapons use principles that human scientists have publicly claimed are impossible." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "The humans have been hiding their true capabilities since before they joined the assembly." The chamber erupted in confused noise. Delegates demanded explanations. Accusations flew across the room. The Kaelo ambassador called for sanctions against Earth for deception. The Mallory suggested a formal investigation. Ambassador Vasquez sat quietly through all of it. She had not returned to her warm diplomatic manner. The smile was back, but it no longer reached her eyes. She looked tired, the assembly noted. Tired and old in a way she had not seen before. When the noise finally died down, she stood and walked to the podium. The chamber fell silent, waiting. "Elder Krikstal is correct," she said. We have hidden our true military capability from the galaxy. We have done so deliberately from the moment we made first contact 300 years ago. The admission sent another wave of shock through the chamber. Several delegates started to speak, but Vasquez raised her hand. Please, let me explain. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. When humanity reached the stars, we had just finished fighting the bloodiest war in our history. Not against aliens, against ourselves. We had burned cities. We had irradiated continents. We had killed billions of our own kind with weapons of such terrible power that we could barely comprehend what we had done. She closed her eyes for a moment. We won that war, if you can call it winning. We unified our planet under a single government and swore to never repeat our mistakes. We dismantled most of our weapons. We redirected our resources toward peace and exploration. We convinced ourselves that we had changed. Our eyes opened, and they were hard. But we did not destroy everything. Some weapons we kept, hidden away where no one would find them. Some programs we continued in secret. Some soldiers we never discharged. She gestured toward the screen, still showing the image of the unkindness. We told ourselves it was just in case. Just a precaution. Just a reminder of what we used to be, kept locked away where it could never hurt anyone. The KLO ambassador found her voice. You lied to us. For 3 centuries, you pretended to be something you were not. No, Vasquez said quietly. We pretended to be something we wanted to be. There is a difference. She stepped around the podium, approaching the center of the chamber. Every human you have ever met has been trying to be the kind, patient, peaceful person we showed you. That was not an act. That was an aspiration. A goal we worked toward every single day. We wanted so desperately to be that version of ourselves. She stopped, looking up at the vast assembly of alien faces surrounding her. But we are not just that version. We are also the species that invented nuclear weapons and pointed them at our own children. We are the species that built concentration camps and poison gas and bombs that burned the air itself. We are the species that looked at every horror imaginable and said, yes, we can do that and worse. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We kept our weapons hidden because we were afraid. Not of you, of ourselves. We were afraid that if the galaxy saw what we truly were, they would reject us. Or worse, they would fear us. And we were afraid that if we showed our true face, we might become that thing again. She turned to look directly at Elder Crickstall. You were right about us, Elder. We have a courtesy setting. And we keep it on because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The chamber was silent. Even the Croshan delegation, what remained of it, had nothing to say. Finally, the Mallory representative spoke. Their species was known for their logic, their lack of emotion, their careful analysis of every situation. The Croshan attacked your civilians, the Mallory said. They threatened your children. By any reasonable standard, your response was justified. Justified, Vasquez repeated. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Do you know what the hardest part was? Not destroying their fleet. That was easy. Terrifyingly easy. The hardest part was stopping. She looked at the screen, at the drifting wreckage of Croshan ships. We left War Master Thrax alive. We left his ship functional enough for him to return home. Do you know why? The Mallory shook their head. Because if we had killed him, we would have wanted to kill more. And more after that. And we would have justified it to ourselves, because they hurt our children and they deserved it. Vasquez's voice cracked slightly. That is the danger of what we are. Once we start, it is very hard to stop. That is why we keep the leash on. That is why we smile and negotiate and turn the other cheek. She straightened, composing herself. We do not want to be what we were. We want to be what we showed you. Kind, patient, peaceful. But you should never, ever forget that the other thing is still there, waiting, watching, ready to emerge if something makes a slip." She walked back to the podium, her shoulders straight despite the weight she carried. The Crocian made a slip. We contained it. We pulled ourselves back. But it was closer than you know. Closer than I want to admit. She looked out at the assembly one last time. "We are trying very hard to be good. Please do not make that harder than it has to be." The session ended without further discussion. There was nothing left to say. The galaxy had seen humanity's true face, and it needed time to understand what that meant. In the corridors outside the chamber, delegates whispered to each other in 100 languages. The consensus was the same everywhere. The humans had been telling the truth all along. They really were trying to be gentle. They really did want peace, and that made them more terrifying than any conquest-hungry empire the galaxy had ever faced, because a predator that could not control itself was simply dangerous, but a predator that chose restraint, that held itself back every moment of every day, that lived with the constant temptation to unleash its true nature. That was something else entirely. 10 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways both large and small. The Crocian Dominion collapsed within months of War Master Thrax's return. His own people, who had watched the broadcast of their fleet's destruction, had seen something they had never seen before. Their conquering armies defeated utterly and completely by a species that had seemed so harmless. The subject races of the Dominion rose up one by one. They had been afraid for generations, convinced that the Crocian were unstoppable. But now they knew the truth. Conquerors could be broken. Empires could fall. The Crocian, reduced to their home system, became the thing they had never expected to be: ordinary. They joined the assembly eventually, much diminished, and their representatives were quiet and cautious in a way the Crocian had never been before. Humanity, meanwhile, returned to its old ways. Ambassador Vasquez continued her work for another 5 years before retiring. She spent her final years on a small colony world, far from the centers of power, teaching young diplomats the art of patience and compromise. When she died, representatives from over 200 species attended her memorial service. The human military remained exactly as it had always appeared: modest, professional, unremarkable. The ships that had emerged from nowhere to Wardrast destroy the Crocian fleet were never seen again. The unkindness and its sister vessels vanished back into whatever shadows they had come from. Some species searched for them. The Vethkai in particular spent considerable resources trying to locate human military facilities that did not appear on any official records. They found nothing. Either the facilities did not exist, or they were hidden beyond any technology the galaxy possessed to find them. Life went on. Trade agreements were negotiated. Cultural exchanges continued. Disaster relief was coordinated. Humans remained the galaxy's most enthusiastic participants in every cooperative program. Always ready to help, always quick to apologize for misunderstandings. Always smiling that warm diplomatic smile. But things were different now. The galaxy knew. Elder Krikstal received many visitors in the years after the Crocian incident. Other species wanted to understand what the Vethkai had figured out long before. They read human history. They studied human fiction. They analyzed human psychology. And slowly, painfully, they began to understand. The KLO ambassador came to Krikstal with a question that many had asked. "The humans we meet every day," she said. "The ones who help us and trade with us and laugh at our jokes. Are they real? Or is it all an act?" Krikstal considered the question carefully. "Tell me, Ambassador, when you interact with humans, do they seem genuine to you? Do they seem to truly enjoy your company, to truly care about your well-being? Yes, she admitted. That is what confuses me. They seem so sincere. Because they are sincere, Krikstal said. That is what makes them so remarkable. The humans we meet are not pretending to be kind. They are actually being kind. The warmth you feel from them is real. The friendship they offer is genuine. But underneath, they are also capable of tremendous violence. Both things are true at the same time. The gentleness is not a mask hiding the violence. The violence is not a monster waiting to escape. They are the same being, holding both possibilities within themselves, choosing every day which one to express. The ambassador struggled with this concept. Her species had clear categories for behavior. One was either peaceful or aggressive, kind or cruel. The idea of being both simultaneously was difficult to grasp. Think of it this way, Krikstal suggested. A human meets you at a diplomatic function. They smile, they ask about your family, they make pleasant conversation. In that moment, they are genuinely enjoying your company. They are genuinely being kind. Nothing about that interaction is false. He paused. But if someone were to threaten your life in front of that same human, they would kill to protect you. Without hesitation, without mercy. And they would feel no contradiction in doing so. Because to them, kindness and violence are not opposites. They are tools. Different tools for different situations, both equally available, both equally real. The ambassador was quiet for a long time. That is terrifying, she finally said. Yes, Krikstal agreed. It is also, I think, admirable. Admirable? Consider what it means to be human. To carry within yourself the capacity for both tremendous good and tremendous evil. To feel the pull of violence, the temptation to use your strength against those weaker than you. And to choose, every day, to be gentle instead. Krikstal's compound eyes seemed to soften. That is not weakness. That is the hardest kind of strength. The years continued to pass. New generations grew up in a galaxy that knew what humanity truly was. They read the histories. They watched the recordings. They understood that the friendly humans they met at space, stations and diplomatic functions, were also the species that had nearly destroyed itself with nuclear fire. And something strange happened. Instead of fearing humanity, the younger generations began to admire them. Here was a species that had stared into its own darkness and chosen to be light. Here was a species that carried the burden of its own terrible potential and used that knowledge to be kinder, not crueler. Here was a species that had every reason to be monsters and had decided to be friends instead. The phrase courtesy setting entered the galactic vocabulary, but it took on a different meaning than Krikstal had intended. It became not an accusation, but a compliment. To have a courtesy setting meant to be capable of more than you showed. It meant to be dangerous, but choosing to be gentle. It meant to be strong and using that strength to help rather than harm. Other species began to aspire to it. The Kaalo reformed their military doctrine to emphasize restraint. The Thrall developed new philosophical schools focused on choosing kindness despite capacity for violence. Even the remnants of the Crocian began to change, their younger generations rejecting the conquest ideology that had defined their species for millennia. Ambassador Vasquez had been right. In the end, humanity's greatest weapon was not their hidden fleet. It was not their terrible capacity for violence. It was their example. Their proof that a species could look at its own worst impulses and choose to be better. On the anniversary of the Crocian incident, 50 years after the battle that had changed everything, a memorial ceremony was held in the assembly chamber. Representatives from every member species gathered to remember what had happened and what it had meant. The current human ambassador, a young man named Chun, who was no relation to the admiral who had commanded the unkindness, gave a short speech. He spoke about peace and cooperation, about the importance of choosing kindness even when strength was available. He smiled the same warm smile that Ambassador Vasquez had smiled, and the assembly saw the same genuine warmth in his eyes. When he finished, Elder Krixtal, ancient now even by Vethkai standards, rose to speak. 50 years ago, he said, I watched humanity reveal its true face to the galaxy. I had expected to see monsters. I had expected to see predators wearing masks of civilization. Instead, I saw something I had never imagined. He looked at Ambassador Chun. I saw a species that was both things at once. Gentle and terrible, kind and deadly, peaceful and violent. I saw a species that carried its own darkness within itself and used that knowledge to reach for the light. He turned to face the full assembly. The humans taught us something important that day. They taught us that being good is not about lacking the capacity for evil. It is about having that capacity and choosing not to use it. It is about knowing what you could do and deciding to do something better instead. He paused, his ancient voice growing soft. The most dangerous predator is not the one that cannot stop hunting. It is the one that could hunt but chooses not to. That chooses, every day, to be something more than its nature demands. He bowed to Ambassador Chun. Thank you, humanity, for showing us what that choice looks like. Thank you for being the monsters that decided to be friends. Ambassador Chun bowed back, his eyes suspiciously bright. Thank you, he said, for giving us the chance to be who we wanted to be. The ceremony ended. The delegates returned to their work. The galaxy continued to spin through the void, full of countless species trying to find their way among the stars, and humanity continued to smile, continued to help, continued to choose kindness over cruelty. The courtesy setting remained on dot, but now the galaxy understood what that meant. Not weakness, not deception, but the hardest, bravest kind of strength, the strength to be gentle when you could be terrible, the strength to be kind when you could be cruel, the strength to be human.